Thank you so much for coming on. It's great to meet you. So can you say your name and title and what you do, please?
Yeah, so my name's David Moloney. I'm an assistant professor at Southern New Hampshire University, and I teach creative writing and English.
Could you please tell us a little bit about your debut novel, Barker House, and what that book explores?
Yeah, so Barker House tells the story of corrections officers. So a lot of prison lit is from the point of view of the inmates. And so being a former corrections officer, I thought it would be cool to sort of tell the other side. And so each story takes place from the point of view of a CO. There are the sort of dramatic dialogues that take place from the inmate's point of view, but mostly it's the officers. And so my idea was to tell a truthful story about what it's like to be a CO. So when I was going through the training academy at the jail, you do the, I think it was a 16-week academy of 14. And one of the days we focused on how media portrays COs. And it always stuck with me. They're always brutes, they're beating people up, they're sadistic. They're always the mean guy that, kicks the door shut and takes the key away. And so I thought, okay, that's not true to every CO. So how can I tell this story? Like, even though it's warts and all, it's not, I'm not like forgiving what we did as officers, but I wanted to just tell an honest story about what it's like to be an officer. And so it follows 9 different corrections officers. Some of them come and go throughout the book. It's a novel in stories. So every chapter is a standalone story, but when you read it as a whole, it tells, the story of a year at the house, at Barker House of Corrections, which is fictional, but it's based off my experiences.
I've seen that you've written both fiction and also nonfiction. For example, like with the short story Honeymoon or your essay and memoir, I was a corrections officer, the initiation was messed up. What are some of the similarities and differences you found kind of between writing 2 of those, or both of those? What are the similarities and differences you find between writing a short story, for example, and an essay such memoir? That was a little bit more straightforward than the way I worded it.
Yeah, no, fiction's easy because you just make stuff up, right? So like Barker House, if anyone did the research, it is Hillsborough County, which is the largest county in New Hampshire, which is where I worked. But it doesn't exist. And so once you're able to sort of suspend belief and take away, oh, this really happened, and it's like, no, this did not happen, I can just make it up, that's freeing, right? And so a lot of, and I know Maureen told me this, even Professor Dietz, and sort of, if you write nonfiction, it's cathartic, right? And you get it's almost like therapy, right? You're getting it out. I didn't find that to be the case. I was writing truthful stuff about the jail, and I didn't want to go there. I didn't want to put people that I knew and worked with intimately in bad positions. And so I didn't want, even though this is my debut, when I was writing it, I was naive and thought, okay, no one's ever going to read this, so who cares? But still, in the back of my mind, I was like, okay, I don't want to paint them in a bad light. They're still working there. They have families, pensions. And so once I made it fiction, I could change the names, change the place, the setting, and then that allowed me to do whatever the hell I wanted. And so it became fun then. So it might be, some of my stories might be a true story, and then I just turned it up to 10, right? And so in nonfiction, you can't really do that. You're kind of restricted into the truth or truthiness. And so I find nonfiction to be difficult because I know people can call you on your BS. You can't make stuff up. Everything has to be the way you remembered it to be. It doesn't have to be perfect. Our memory deceives us. But so nonfiction to me is tough. I spent that essay I wrote about being sort of hazed and pepper sprayed that as true as I remember it to be. So when I first started writing that essay, I went back through my notes. I kept my academy notes. And I remembered it being a Friday, and I remembered all these things. And then when I went through the notes, it wasn't, I thought it was the last day of the academy, and then we graduated. But it was 2 weeks before grad. So my memory was lying to me. So nonfiction can be tough because you have to research it, and you have to make it as truthful as you can. And fiction, you don't have to at all. You can just make it up. And so I like fiction more.
How would you characterize the industry of fiction/prose today?
So the publishing industry is going through a reckoning, and rightfully so, since the pandemic started, George Floyd. 2020 on, and most of the industry is run by predominantly white people. So I think, the New York Times did articles on this, and it's mostly white people getting published. And so now we have own voices, other voices coming into the industry, and some people think that's disruptive because it's not the status quo. It's different, but I think it's good, right? Because it can become stale. We're reading the same things. So I like where it is now, especially with like queer lit, and that sort of was not a thing 10 years ago, where you could just have a romance novel with queer characters. That was just not, it was sort of like this niche sort of readership, and now it's becoming mainstream. So I think by them facing this I think COVID and George Floyd and cops beating people in the streets sort of opened up a larger okay, we need to allow more voices. And so that can become frustrating for some people who they just expect to publish, right? And now there's a larger pool, and there's better writing, and there's better competition. And so, cream rises to the top. So now I think we are seeing some really good books coming out of this that I don't think we would have saw a decade ago. So the industry is changing. There used to be the big five, now it's the big four publishers. So it's also shrinking in terms of, who is actually publishing and paying. So author pay from the 70s and 80s to now is actually going down. So career authors are gone, right? Like the Stephen Kings, John Grishams, Nora Roberts, that's not most, like me, I'm a teacher, and Andre Dubus teaches full-time. And so even if you are making money as a writer, you have to supplement it. And that's sort of, that wasn't always the case. And so I don't know I think that's a bad thing. I think we should have career writers, but the industry is just not paying like it used to.
What advice would you have for writers who are looking to get published today?
So I tell my students this all the time: write the best book you have in you. Don't write to a trend. So the publishing industry is slow. So say you sold your book today to HarperCollins or Bloomsbury, it's 2 years before it gets to the shelf. I don't think a lot of writers know that, especially younger writers. They think, I wrote a book, I got an agent, I got an editor to buy it, it's on the shelf in 6 months. It's 2 years. So if you're writing right now, I don't even know what's in, I guess dystopian's back in with The Last of Us, and sort of, before it was vampire zombie, right? And so trends come and go. If you're gonna write a dystopian novel right now to the trend, in 2 years that's gone. So you don't write the trends, write the best book you wanna write. And a lot of it is luck. You just hit that trend. My book is about law enforcement. I sold it in 2018. It came out in April 2020 when COVID shut down the country, bookstores closed. Literally, my book sat in bookstores collecting dust for 6 months. People weren't even in the stores. So I was super excited about, this is gonna be a big deal. And then that summer, we had the riots and the cops in the streets. and then there's no appetite for law enforcement literature. So even though I was excited about this book, and it's not a pro-law enforcement book at all, I think it's in the middle. If I wrote towards that trend, I could have never foresaw global pandemic, the riots and the cops, and questioning whether we even need law enforcement, right? Like that was never in my brain. So don't write towards a trend. Just write the book that's in you, get it out, and maybe you hit the trend, maybe you don't. But never write towards what you think will sell. Because in 2 years, in 2025, we have no idea what's going to be selling.
Yeah. What would you say it is for, someone who is a writer and is looking to complete something, get something published, how important would you say it is for them to just keep writing and keep reading, and keep exposing themselves to more things and just keep working at it?
Yeah, reading's number one.
Yeah.
When I was at UMass Lowell, I was sort of the non-traditional student, so I was older. I went back to school at 27, and I had already done things in the world, and I decided, okay, I want to write. And so I thought I was coming into class the best writer. Everything I was gonna crush it. Everything I wrote was gonna be great. And my intro, I won't name him, but he knows. He pulled me aside and he said, I can tell you don't read much. And that was a dagger to me, because he was right. I didn't read much, and it was showing on the page. And so the best advice he gave me was read more and read less dead people. Read people who are alive, writing now. Don't read Hemingway, Faulkner, because that was just my go-to. Kerouac, Hemingway, Faulkner. And I was trying to write like them. And so it helped. He's like, who are you reading that's alive? I'm like, nobody. And so he checked me, and that helped. So I had to really start back from scratch and say, okay, I need to read more and less thinking I'm the best. I'm going to be the next best American novelist, that sort of idea. And that helped a ton. I just read things outside of my comfort zone, Eastern lit and African lit, and not just dead white guys. And that changed my writing.
Okay, so what books and pieces inspire you daily?
Daily?
Yeah. Or just in general? And that can be anything.
Unfortunately, I still read a lot of Faulkner, but I'm just never going to stop. I'm inspired by writers doing different things, and my book does a lot of different things. And so I'm trying to, Tommy Orange did There.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, okay, I can write a book that doesn't have this cohesive thread until the end. What is that? Marcus Burke wrote Team 7, which is a Boston-based sort of book, and it's all these characters are everywhere, and I call it the gangs all here approach, where we meet everybody, and then in the end, they all come together in this gathering. I stole that and did it with a softball game in my book. So I sort of I'm inspired by writers who are messing with the novel, not that linear, one narrator, 300 pages. That, it's changing, and we're consuming things differently. We love, the short story is back, and the short story was big in the 70s and 80s, and it kind of died out. And then I was worried about the short story because, in the early 2000s, it was kind of going away. And now attention spans are smaller, and now the short story is back because people will read 12 pages, not 400 pages. So if I could write a novel of all these small pieces, but still make them all work together. So I'm inspired by people that are just changing the novel. The novel should not stay the same.
Yeah. It's funny that you brought up There by Tommy Orange, because I was thinking about that earlier when you were talking about, because There came out in 2020, I think?
Yeah, it was a month before my book came out, yeah.
And I was thinking about that earlier when you were talking about, new writers and exposing yourself to new stuff, because There, I read There, and it was just amazing.
Yeah.
It really left it's just one of those pieces that you read that just leaves an impact on you. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And I guess that can segue now too. What books and pieces are you reading now?
So now that I'm teaching, I'm in full teaching mode. I'm reading Scott Blackburn wrote a crime novel called It Dies With You, and it's a very sort of a crime book where it takes place in a salvage yard in North Carolina. It's very cool. People die, but I typically don't read crime. I'm teaching a crime lit class, so during the semester I just read sort of what I'm teaching, and so I just read White Noise by DeLillo about 2 months ago, and so it's tough to read during the semester, and I'm sure your professors will tell you that. A lot of student reading,
Yeah.
which is good. I have some really good student writers who I'm excited about their books.
Awesome. So, moving in the excerpt of Counsel from Barkhouse, there's a scene between the therapist Jerry and the narrator, and they're kind of both seem to be just talking about what's on their heads, and it really just seems for me captures, I think, how people talk, you know, like it really like it's just like, okay, yeah, like two people, they would absolutely sound like that, and it really like just kind of what's the word? It rings true to take from my professors.
Mhm.
That's what just came to me. So then to segue into the question, you know, what are the challenges that come with trying to make dialogue sound realistic? You know, like what are the steps that need to be taken?
Well, the barrier I see in a lot of young writers and student writers is TV. They're trying to write a TV script. They're not writing literature, right? So the problem is everyone's answering each other directly, or they're answering each other to move the plot forward. And that to me, that's not organic, right? We wouldn't talk about, you know, what you're doing for the day, especially if you've lived with your wife for 20 years, right? Like they know what they're doing that day. So you can't fall back on that sort of, I hate pleasantries. Like, hey, how are you doing? Good, right? Like you cut all that, right? You get down to interesting dialogue, make it interesting. And so one of the easiest ways to do that as a writer is to have two characters not answer each other, right? Like a character says something and then someone says something different. And that's organic. That happens when people talk to each other. And we actually just did a dialogue exercise today in class that was very similar to this. And I had each student find a piece of dialogue that sort of the class critiqued that didn't go well. And I said, next to each line of dialogue, I want you to justify why that line is there. Just even if you can justify it, then leave it. If you can't justify it, cut it. Because no one wants to read boring dialogue. And so when I write dialogue, every line has to matter. And so in that scene, they're getting to like a really difficult thing that he's been dealing with. Macon's been dealing with the death of a boy under his care. But Jerry doesn't know that. And he doesn't want to tell him that. So instead of telling him, they're talking about his daughter. But we know the underlying dialogue is with us. So the dialogue with Jerry seems organic and real, but really he's talking to the reader, and he's letting us know why he's avoiding these questions, why he won't answer him. And so I think that's when dialogue works. You have to blend interiority and dialogue. There's nothing worse than just reading 2 pages of people arguing or going back and forth with each other. It's not pleasing for the reader. We need to know the subtext, or we need to know why this character is avoiding what needs to be said. That's why TV shows don't work. Like a lot of TV shows, it's just a miscommunication. Like everything could be solved if you guys just talk to each other, but they don't say what needs to be said, and we can't hear their interiority. And that's why literature does it so well. Why are they avoiding saying what needs to be said? And the reader knows.
Yeah. Would you be willing to read a short excerpt from Barkhouse?
Yeah. So there's one I like to read. Okay, so this is from Brenna's chapter called Property, and it's right in the middle of the book. And Brenna was my most difficult character because she's the only woman character, and I had to get her right, which is hard for a male writer. But luckily I had, my agent is a woman, editor, copy editor. So everyone that touched this book after me was a woman, so they helped me. But I really like the beginning of this one. So this is right from the start. Her mother used to restore old dolls, specifically American Campo dolls, Madame Alexander, Amberg. One of her last memories of her mother, it must have been a Sunday afternoon, when she would invite Brenna to stand at the sink with her and watch her take the green out of a doll's mohair wig. It was such a careful process. The doll would be covered in plastic wrap so it wouldn't get wet. Each strand of hair was massaged in the soapy water, then brushed with a metal comb. She'd fill cracks, airbrush their faces, paint their eyes and mouths, so gentle, and the strokes clean. But then she'd scuff them. No one wants a doll that looks new, she'd say. The dolls were sent to her in the mail. She cared for them as if they were the owner's children. Brenna was tempted to play with the dolls, but it was a mother's work, and she wouldn't have dared. In this last memory, maybe the last before breast cancer took her, her mother made up a doll's face with charcoal eyebrows and magenta cheeks, and though Brenna couldn't remember her mother's face much from that day, that doll's face remained with her. Inside the property room, Brenna stood before a clown-faced junkie, pupils pointed down, thick red lips that cracked and smeared, still groggy from whatever she'd swallowed or stuck in her arm before her arrest. The woman was young, younger than Brenna, who was 25. Hobson called her a whippersnapper, and she didn't think he knew what it meant. He might as well pat her on the head and give her a sticker. Nashua had scooped up 6 women in a prostitution ring, and Brenna was sure to spend her entire break searching holes for bags. Fish hook your cheeks, Brenna explained, miming the action. Straighten up. I said straighten up. With your fingers. Fish hook. The new admin was nude, her skin bruised in all sorts of places, but the ones that stood out to Brenna were the deep blue ones on her armpits. She stumbled and caught herself against the brick wall, then leaned there. Behind her were shelves of bagged and boxed inmate property, shoes, jewelry, clothes, suits dropped off by loved ones or good lawyers for court. The large, closet-like room smelled like wet sneakers. Behind Brenna was a shower where inmates rinsed, like at a public pool. They'd dry off and get walked through the unclothed search procedure. Other than the Bubble on Max, which was a boys' club for male officers to pack dips and nap, the property room was the only room that was not under video surveillance. Hun, you need to get this over with, Brenna said. Brenna took the few steps that were in between them, and she helped the woman stand up. I'm going to inspect your mouth, then I'm going to bend you over at the waist and check you. Can you do this with me? The inmate nodded. Her dry tongue peeked between her crusted lips. Brenna checked her mouth. She'd been working at the jail for a year, and she had learned much about people, how bad people's teeth could get. The inmates, the hookers, and women with gangrene arms, their teeth could get rock-like, gravelly. Dr. McKeel, the county dentist, didn't get paid nearly enough. The inmate's breath smelled like cigarettes. Brenna grabbed her around the waist with her left arm and pushed her into a bow with her other hand. The inmate let all her weight collapse in Brenna's grasp, and her arms hung limp. Brenna struggled to hold her up and spread her feet to get a stronger stance, then inspect the inmate's vagina and anus as respectfully as one could.
Thank you. So, we're still good, Mason?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, awesome. There's one more thing I want to do, I'm sorry. Okay. So, since we made reference to it earlier, could you just quickly say what year you graduated from UMass Lowell? Or, yeah, like what you graduated, or I guess you don't really have to say that it's overdone. But like, what year you graduated from UMass Lowell and such?
Yeah, I graduated UMass Lowell in 2015 with a creative writing degree. And then right after that, I went to my master's program like 2 weeks later. So I was pretty much, when I went back to school as an older student, I was determined to do it right the second time around. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
thank you.
Thank
It
you.
was good. It was great.